I want to talk about something that appeals to me when it comes to just indie films in general, and that is the following question. What is the role of indie films in shaping the cinema industry as a whole? And in case you're not aware of what an indie picture is, it's essentially an independent movie that isn't backed by some big and illustrious studio head. They're also made with, lower budgets than what you would usually see from a movie that's released by Disney, Netflix, or Warner Brothers Studios. Which means that if you are an indie filmmaker, you either have to rely on the generosity of strangers to crowdfund that movie for you, or gather up your life savings to make a low budget movie, while at the same time crossing your fingers that it's going to blow up in your local film festival. In a good way, that is. Okay, so now that you are comprehensive of what an indie movie is and the reality of making one, which is important, you know, to know for this topic, I think that indie films have a tune to sing when it comes to the development of the cinema industry orchestra, if you will. We need to look at what's going on in Hollywood, where a studio like Disney is regulating an artist's creative power to the industrial standard. Let's say that a filmmaker has a screenplay that is about a cat hijacking an alien rocket ship in space, and it happens to contain a, believe it or not, profound, original, and well constructed story around that premise. Hollywood ain't gonna allow them to write that because the studio managers are under the perception that the screenplay is too strange. That, and they're probably gonna drug test you because no one with a sober mind is going to write a story about a cat hijacking an alien rocket ship in outer space. I am just kidding, of course. If you want to write a story like that, it's okay if you don't give me credit for the idea. Would be nice if you did, but just follow your heart and write the hell out of it. Because it's just like baking a cookie. You know, not everyone uses the measuring spoon. There's a saying that goes, you measure that shit with your heart. My point is, that when you make an indie film, you have unlimited creative power at your disposal. You get to enjoy the freedom of not having a studio interfere with your vision. You are your own boss, essentially, which is just rad. This leads to the next thing that I want to point out. The unlimited creative power of becoming an indie filmmaker is what generates the most nuanced and caliber screenplays. You have The Passion of the Christ, which only had a $25 million budget, but it still ended up making $917 million in the box office. There's also The Full Monty. Only $3.5 million was invested in the production process for that movie. Guess how much it made? Guess. I'll give you a few seconds. Did you guess yet? Alright, well, the answer which I'm about to disclose to you is $521 million. $521 million. Okay, forget thousands. We're in the million game. And it is because of these indie films, as I've described, that the economy in the film industry boomed like never before, which led to even more inspired filmmakers pursuing their dream careers of becoming a multi-millionaire film director, which in turn leads to a wider catalog of exceptional movies for consumers to select from. I would also like to mention another way that indie films have a role in shaping the cinema industry. And that's the motivation of making the best product as you can, which actually comes from having a low budget. Because the thing is, a studio like Disney doesn't care if they take out a loan and add filler scenes in their moments and dilute the runtime of their movies. Or if a movie like Star Wars The Last Jedi doesn't resonate with people. At the end of the day, they probably have a separate money vault to account for box office losses. An indie filmmaker doesn't have access to this many of resources, which means that everything that they do has to count in the end. They probably have to go over their script 1,000 times and treat it like a full novel before they even start shooting it. Why do you think that is? Well, that's because when it comes to the nature of producing an indie film, they don't have the budget to accommodate for failure. Otherwise, they might not ever make a movie ever again. They would have blown their one and only chance of making a good movie. It's game over. You don't just want to be an indie filmmaker just to appease a large crowd. You want to become an indie filmmaker because, again, it's like baking cookies. The amount of batter is measured through the heart. And because your heart is going to explode out of your chest if you don't make your vision a product, you will end up appeasing the market that you're trying to reach anyway. Like, you are so passionate about your screenplay that you think the people have to know about it. That's why many of the indie films that we see are authentic. Going back to the homemade cooking analogy, it is equivalent to taking delight in a fresh, home-cooked meal, which makes the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm not trying to diss it, a fast food restaurant by pale comparison. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the essence of being an indie filmmaker that is driven by the sheer creative force and motivation to make the best motion picture ever. And that's why indie artists have such a substantial contributing role in the cinema industry. But, this is just my insight. I would now like to hear yours. Whatever your insights, agreements, reservations, and other disagreement, questions, and thoughts are, let me know in the comment section below, or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom.